Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Atenas and this is Mode Bespoke. For today's project, we are crocheting a herringbone scarf. So let's get started. So here is the project we're going to be crocheting today. It's a really easy scarf to crochet. All you have to learn to do is crochet the herringbone half double stitch. It is a very stretchy stitch, so it stretches on both sides, so makes it really nice for a scarf. It's also really light, so depending on the yarn you use, I suppose, will be how light your scarf will be. But if you're going to be making a scarf that you want to wrap around your neck twice, then you want something a little bit lighter because anything too bulky might be uncomfortable. So especially if you are crocheting this for a guy. So I know us gals wear really big scarves sometimes, and they're more like accent pieces than anything. But for guys, you want it to be something more practical and something that they can wear on a daily basis that looks good with anything that they own. So this is ideal for that. So to get started with this, I should probably go over the measurements real quick. So this scarf, if you want to crochet it the same size as mine, is about almost 8.5 inches across. It's just maybe a little over 8.5 inches. And then I made it long because typically with a scarf, you make it as long as the person is tall. So normally, if the person is really tall, like my husband's 6'3", so I try not to make it that long. That's quite a bit of a long scarf, and he said it's a little uncomfortable for him to be that long. So I would usually go with maybe about 60 inches, just kind of on average for length, unless it's for a gal who's really short, like myself, in which case, maybe 50 inches would be fine. I like to tie my scarf in kind of a knot type way, so I go with 60 inches for myself, but it just depends on the person you're making it for. But lengthwise, you want to make it as long as the person is tall. That's just the standard. If you need help with measurements, I do have some recommended measurement amounts. They're going to be on the pattern, and the pattern is available on the blog, and it is free. I will link the blog and the pattern down in the description box below. So as far as material go, you can use any yarn you want. So I need to start stressing this a little bit more in my videos because I do get a lot of questions about the yarn. For my patterns, you can use any yarn you want. You just have to adjust your hook size to match your yarn. So normally if you're using a different size yarn than what I'm using and a different size hook, you can still complete the work just fine. You might need to alter your measurements a little bit, but most of the time I try to make things so that they're very easily customizable. But if you have any questions, do leave that down in the comment below, and I'm happy to help you with that. So back to this yarn. This is just a standard four size yarn, so it's just a medium yarn, and I'm going to be using an I hook. An I hook is a 5.5 millimeter hook. You can use an H hook, but what I wanted to do here with this particular the feel of this particular scarf was I wanted to make this really, really soft. So I found the best way to do that with this yarn, because I used just the Red Heart Super Saver for this one. I like the way it washes, and I think it's really soft if you use a bigger hook. So if you use a really small hook, I find it's a very stiff yarn, but if you use a bigger hook, such as an I or a J, sometimes even a K, I have used a K hook, for just the Red Heart Super Saver, which is just a medium-sized yarn. I found that it makes it really soft. But doesn't matter, you can use any yarn you want. If you're using a smaller yarn, so if you're gonna make this with a very fine yarn, I would use maybe a G hook, so either a G or an H hook. And then if you are using 4, I would go with an I or a J. If you want it to be really, really soft, you can use a J. A J hook is a 6 millimeter hook. So now, to start this, you don't need multiples of anything. So all you need to know is how wide you want your scarf, because you work your width, and then with every row, you add length to your scarf. So make the chain as wide as you want your scarf to be. I'm just making a small sample, so I'm just going to make a small chain. To start your chain, let me zoom in. you're going to grab your yarn and wrap it around 2 fingers, like so. Hold it down with your thumb, and now grab your hook and insert it into this loop that you made, or into this, I don't know, chain or whatever you want to call it, that you made around your 2 fingers. And now pull this loose yarn, pull that through the loop like so. Hold this down with your index finger, and now you can remove the fingers of your other hand and tighten your slip knot. So we want to get rid of all of this space, so we're just going to grab these 2 threads and pull on them until we tighten our slip knot. So we're ready to begin. Again, you make the chain as long as you want your scarf to be wide. So to start your chain, you're going to yarn over. To yarn over, you wrap the yarn around your hook so that it goes right here from behind, and you're going to pull this top loop through the bottom loop on your hook. So just grab that and pull through. There you go. Now let's do it again. So you yarn over, you pull the top loop through the bottom loop. Yarn over, and you just pull through. Yarn over and pull through. So if you're a beginner, just try to do this as loosely as possible. Don't get discouraged if it gets really tight, because I know I used to crochet this really tightly when I first started crocheting. So I just do my chain and then I would immediately tighten this. If you tighten the knot, it's going to be really very difficult for you to work into this stitch later. So try to leave it as loose as possible. So we're just going to make a few more chains really quickly. Sorry if you can hear the cicadas outside. They like to be really loud while I'm filming. They were totally quiet all morning. They just started making noise now. It is what it is, I guess. All right, so once you have your chain, when however many stitches you want, there's no specific number, multiples, or anything, however long you want, let's move on to row number 2. For row number 2, we're going to start with chain 2. So, and then I like to hold on to this very last stitch before I make my chain. So I like to pinch this last stitch and then just yarn over and chain 1, yarn over, chain 2. Now your first stitch is going to be in that 3rd stitch, which is the one that you just pinched. So here's our chain 2. We're going to work into that 3rd stitch from your hook. What you're going to do, you need to yarn over, and hold this down with your index finger, insert your hook into that 3rd stitch. So that's what the stitch looks like. Insert your hook into your stitch and then just go all the way through. Now you're going to yarn over, and you're going to pull this loop that you just yarned over through the very first loop on your hook. Like so. And you're going to pull that loop through this 2nd loop. So the very first loop goes through the middle loop, like that. And now you're going to be left with 2 loops on your hook. You're going to yarn over and pull through both loops. And there you go. So let's do this a few more times. It will get easier if you're a beginner. Don't worry, it does get easier. If you're experienced, this should go through, or we should be able to go through this really quickly. So you're going to yarn over, insert your hook into the next stitch, yarn over, and you're going to pull it through the stitch. So, and then you're also going to pull it through this middle loop, like so. You're going to be left with 2 loops on your hook. Yarn over and pull through both loops. Let's do this again. Yarn over, insert your hook into the stitch, yarn over, pull your hook out, and then you're going to pull it through this middle stitch. And now you yarn over and pull through both of these. So now all you have left to do is to complete a herringbone half double stitch, which is this stitch that we've been working on, in every stitch of the row. So work 1 herringbone half double for every stitch of this chain. And then if you still need a little bit more help with this, go back to the beginning of the row and practice this a few times. This is the stitch we're going to be using for the entire project, so get really comfortable with it. But I'm going to keep crocheting the rest of this row. Pause the video if you need to, and I'll see you again here in a moment. So I'm almost at the end of my row. I should have another stitch or two left. Yep. And we're at the end. Make sure that you tighten this knot here at the beginning so that you don't think it's one last stitch. So tighten that up, and then we have this one last chain. So work your very last herringbone half double stitch into that. And there we go. So there's our row. So our next row, we're going to start that with a chain 2. So we go chain 1, chain 2, and then turn your work around. You're going to skip this first stitch and you're going to work into the second one. So here's the second stitch, and the first one's the one right next to your chain. So skip that and go into your second stitch. So crochet a herringbone half double into that second stitch. And like I told you earlier in the video, you're going to be using just that one stitch for the entire project. So be sure that at the beginning of the row, you always skip your very first stitch. And that's what's going to give it its really nice herringbone look. So it will make one side of your stitching come up towards the left and then the other one down towards the right. So it'll kind of look a bit like an arrow. So that's what skipping that first stitch will help you create. There are a couple of different ways to start your row. So we will talk about this a little bit further along. So I'll have to crochet a few rows in order to show you what the differences are. That it all comes down to how you want your edges to look, and the difference is how you crochet. So depending on the tension that you use, so how tightly you crochet, how experienced you are, or what size hook you're using, that will make a difference. So we will talk about this here in just a moment, but continue to crochet your herringbone half double crochet for the entire project. So once you reach the end of each row, you can work this in one of two ways, which I'll talk to you a little bit more about as well later. But you see this little gap right in here that's right behind the chain space? So I guess it is technically a chain space. You can make your last herringbone stitch into that space. But what I prefer to do is I work in this top chain. So from that chain 2 that we did at the beginning of the row, I work in that top chain. And that's where my very last stitch goes. So don't forget that very last stitch, otherwise you'll mess up your stitch count and you'll end up with a narrow scarf on one side and wider on the other. So now here's what I was saying about the edges. So I loosen these up a bit just to give it a bit of an exaggerated wave. But if your work starts looking wavy after you've worked a couple of rows, so see it's got a wave, it doesn't have a nice clean edge, like so. So you want a nice clean edge. That way you don't have to create any kind of border. So now I'll show you 3 additional ways that you can start your row so that you have a nice and clean edge. So let's go here with the first one. So you can start with a regular chain and then tighten that up to make it nice and tight, and then you do your second chain. Leave your second chain loose. And now you turn your work around, skip your first stitch, start working the second one, and keep on going. That's method number 1. Method number 2 is make one chain, but leave it really loose. So instead of doing a chain 2, just do chain 1 with one really loose chain. You are always going to skip the first stitch. So no matter which method you use, always skip that first stitch. Work into the second one. So those are 3 different methods right here that you can use to crochet or to create really nice and clean edges. So there are those. Let me finish this row and then do the other one so I can show you what it'll be like to work into that one chain. So I've worked my way around. So I completed the last row and then did another one. And here's that one loose chain that we created. You're just going to work into that, and that is a lot easier to work into. So if you're a beginner, you're having a really hard time with tension and you just can't work into that top chain, if you do the one loose single crochet, it will be really easy for you to work into it. And that should eliminate the squiggly, I guess, wavy edges. The third method you can use is you chain your 2, so chain 2, and at the beginning of the video I told you not to crochet into that chain space. That's why this is the last method. So if all other methods have failed, try this one. Chain 2, and then you're going to turn your work around and then just work your row of herringbone half doubles. And then here I'll crochet a few just so that you can see what the chain space looks like, since we did that at the beginning of the video. Let's do one more. So you'll be left with this sort of chain space. So here's that chain 2, and here's that little gap right in here, so that little space. So crochet that that last herringbone half double, and then your very, very last one of the row, work it into the chain space. So into that little gap, work into that. If that is the method you choose to work with, because that's the easiest one for you, just remember to tighten your chain. So when you do the chain 2, just make them nice and tight. Because at that point, it doesn't matter. You're not going to be working into them. But that'll eliminate some of that little open space, so the bit of a gap that you get at the beginning of every row. It'll eliminate that. But try any of those 3 methods to make these straight edges. Again, it's really dependent on how you crochet. On the written pattern, you're going to see the chain 2, and that's just because that's what I used to crochet this pattern. I will reference the video in case you have the written pattern and you forget that there are other methods to use. I will reference the video. Remember that it all comes down to how you crochet, so even if you're able to use the chain 2 now, if you crochet this in the future and your tension has changed, you might have to go back to the chain 1 or use a different method to get your edges nice and straight. But that's it, guys. I hope you give this scarf a try. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. If you want to see any other kind of project, leave your suggestions down in the comment box below. Do hit that subscribe button if you haven't done it already. I post videos every Thursday. If you want to see any of my free patterns, you can check out the blog. The link is in the description box below. You can also follow me on Instagram to see what it is I'm working on right now and to get a preview for all the projects we're going to be working on here on YouTube. Don't forget to like and share if you've enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, y'all. I'll see you again next week.